The dust from the departing wagons still hung in the air when Willa Ortega realized she had been left behind in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the costume dress on her back, and exactly 3 pennies in her pocket. She stood in the rutted street of Bozeman, Montana, watching the Carmichael acting troupe disappear into the summer heat of 1878, her throat tight with anger and disbelief as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave of ice water. The troupe manager had promised payment after their final performance, but when she had woken that morning in the cramped boarding house room, her fellow actors were already gone, the horses hitched, the wagons packed, and not a single soul had bothered to wake her or leave so much as a note of explanation. "Those lying, cheating snakes," she whispered, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. 3 months of performing every night, mending costumes until her fingers bled, and helping to set up stages in dusty town squares from Wyoming to Montana, and this was her reward. Abandoned, penniless. Alone, the main street of Bozeman stretched before her, a collection of wooden buildings that looked barely permanent, as though a strong wind might carry them all away. A saloon, a general store, a bank that appeared more optimistic than its surroundings warranted. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow even in July, beautiful and completely indifferent to her predicament. Willa was 22 years old, and this was not the first time life had dealt her a cruel hand, but it might have been the cruelest. She had joined the troupe of St. Louis after her mother died, desperate for any way to earn her keep that did not involve the kind of work that made her stomach turn. She had thought acting would be glamorous, that she would see the world beyond the cramped tenement where she had grown up. Instead, she had discovered that traveling theater meant sleeping in wagons, eating hardtack more often than real food, and performing for audiences who sometimes threw vegetables instead of coins. But she had been good at it. The audiences had loved her portrayals of tragic heroines and spirited ingenues. She had a voice that could fill a tent and a face that, while not classically beautiful, held a quality that made people lean forward in their seats. All that talent, and here she stood with 3 pennies and a costume dress that marked her as clearly as a scarlet letter. "You look lost, miss." Willa turned to find an older woman standing in the doorway of the general store, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression somewhere between suspicious and concerned. The woman wore a simple calico dress and an apron dusted with flour. "I am lost," Willa admitted, because there seemed little point in pretending otherwise. "My theatrical company left without me, and I find myself without means." The woman's expression shifted toward sympathy, though it remained guarded. "The Carmichael troupe?" They pulled out before dawn. "Heard tell they were in a hurry to make Virginia City before another company claimed the venue. They did not see fit to inform me of their departure time," Willa said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I do not suppose there is work to be found in Bozeman. I can read and write, I am good with numbers, I can sew, cook after a fashion, clean. We do not get many opportunities for paid work here, especially not for young women traveling alone." The store owner's tone was not unkind, but it was honest. "Most families handle their own affairs. The boarding house might need help, but Martha Henley is particular about who she employs." Willa felt her hopes, already thin, begin to crumble entirely. "I see. Thank you for your honesty. There is one thing," the woman said slowly, as though weighing her words carefully. "Zachariah Pike came down from his mountain yesterday looking for supplies. Mentioned he could use someone to help with cooking and such at his camp. He is running a small logging operation up in the high country, just him and a couple of hands. It is hard work, isolated work, but he pays fair." "A logging camp?" Willa tried to imagine it and could not quite form the picture. "How far?" "About 15 miles up into the mountains. Takes most of a day to reach by wagon. Zachariah is a good man, honest as they come, but he is rough. Mountain living does that to a person. If you are interested, he is likely at the Prospector Saloon settling his accounts. Big fellow, hard to miss, hair down past his shoulders, beard like a grizzly, built like he could uproot trees with his bare hands." Willa glanced down at her costume dress, a ridiculous confection of yellow silk and lace that was meant to suggest a refined Southern belle. She looked like she had stepped out of a stage production, which of course she had. The idea of presenting herself at a saloon dressed like this, asking a mountain man for work, was so absurd she almost laughed. But what choice did she have? 3 pennies would not buy her a meal, let alone passage to another town. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Thank you," she said to the store owner. "Truly, you have been kinder than you needed to be." The woman nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Go careful, miss, and if Zachariah Pike turns you down, come back here. We will figure something out. I will not see a young woman starve in the street if I can help it." The words brought unexpected tears to Willa's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough over the past few months. What she needed now was not tears but determination. The Prospector Saloon was not difficult to find. It was the largest building on the street, with a painted sign that had once been bright but was now faded by sun and weather. Willa paused outside, gathering her courage. She had never entered a saloon in her life. Respectable women did not. But then, she was alone and penniless in Montana, so perhaps the rules of respectability no longer applied. She pushed through the swinging doors. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. The saloon was not crowded at this hour, just a handful of men nursing drinks at the bar and a poker game in progress at a corner table. Every head turned when she entered, conversation stopping mid-sentence. Willa lifted her chin and walked toward the bar with as much confidence as she could muster. "I am looking for Zachariah Pike." The bartender, a weathered man with suspicious eyes, jerked his thumb toward the far end of the bar. "There. But he is settling accounts and does not take kindly to interruptions." Willa followed the gesture and felt her breath catch. The woman at the general store had said Zachariah Pike was big, but that description had not prepared her for the reality. He sat at the bar like a mountain himself, broad shoulders straining against a worn flannel shirt, arms thick with muscle that spoke of years of hard labor. His hair was indeed long, falling past his shoulders in dark waves that looked like they had been tied back recently and then freed. His beard was full but trimmed, framing a face that was all hard angles and weathered skin, the face of a man who spent his days in wind and sun and cold. He was bent over a ledger, a pencil looking absurdly small in his large hand as he made notations. Willa approached slowly, very aware of every eye in the saloon following her progress. When she was close enough, she cleared her throat. "Mr. Pike?" He did not look up immediately, finishing whatever calculation he was working on. When he did raise his head, Willa found herself looking into eyes the color of a winter sky, pale blue and startlingly clear in his tanned face. Those eyes swept over her, taking in the costume dress, her dusty boots, her uncertain expression, and she saw his brow furrow in confusion. "I do not recall ordering a dancing girl," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. Heat flooded Willa's cheeks. "I am not a dancing girl, I am an actress. Was an actress. My troupe left me behind without payment, and I was told you might have work available." Zachariah Pike set down his pencil and turned on his stool to face her fully. Up close he was even more imposing, tall enough that even seated he was nearly at her eye level. His gaze was direct, assessing, not unkind but certainly not warm either. "Mrs. Henderson sent you?" "If Mrs. Henderson runs the general store, then yes. And what kind of work are you looking for, Miss?" "Ortega, Willa Ortega. I was told you needed help with cooking and such at your logging camp. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, keep accounts if needed. I am a hard worker, and I learn quickly." His expression remained neutral, but she thought she saw a flicker of amusement in those pale eyes. "My logging camp is not a theater, Miss Ortega. It is 15 miles up a mountain, accessible only by a rough trail. The work is hard. The conditions are rough. I have 2 men working for me right now, and neither of them has what you would call refined manners. We are up before dawn and work until dark. The cooking's done over an open fire or a wood stove if we are lucky. There is no privacy to speak of, no luxury. And when winter comes, we are sometimes snowed in for weeks at a time." "It sounds dreadful," Willa said honestly. "But I have 3 pennies to my name, no prospects, and no way to leave Bozeman even if I wanted to. So unless you have a better suggestion, Mr. Pike, I am willing to work for food and shelter and whatever wages you think fair." He studied her for a long moment, and Willa refused to look away, even though her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. Finally he sighed, a sound like wind through pine trees. "Can you actually cook, or is that an exaggeration?" "I can cook enough to keep people fed. My mother ran a boarding house in St. Louis. I grew up cooking for a dozen people at a time." "And you are not afraid of hard work?" "Mr. Pike, I have spent the last 3 months traveling with a theater troupe that could barely afford to feed its performers. I have set up stages in rainstorms, sewn costumes by candlelight until my eyes burned, and performed with a fever so high I could barely stand. I am not afraid of hard work. I am afraid of starving to death in a town where I know no one." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that might have been respect. "Fair enough, I will give you a trial. 1 month. I pay $20 a month plus room and board. If it does not work out, I will bring you back down the mountain and pay you for whatever time you put in. But I will not tolerate drama, Miss Ortega. I left civilization because I got tired of dealing with other people's nonsense. My mountain is for working, not for theatrics." $20 a month was more than the troupe had ever paid her. Willa felt a rush of relief so intense it made her dizzy. "You will not regret this, Mr. Pike, I promise. We will see about that. He stood, and Willa had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was easily over 6 feet tall, his frame all muscle and strength, the kind of build that came from years of physical labor. We leave in an hour. I need to finish loading the wagon. Do you have any belongings to collect? Just myself. His eyebrows rose. They really did leave you with nothing. They did, bastards, he muttered, and there was real anger in the word. Go to Mrs. Henderson at the general store. Tell her to put together a set of practical clothes for you on my account. You cannot work on a mountain in that. He gestured at her costume dress. Get sturdy boots if she has them, warm clothes, practical things, and get something to eat. You look like you have not had a decent meal in a week. Willa felt that treacherous sting of tears again. That is very kind of you. It is practical. Cannot have you collapsing from hunger on the trail. But his tone was gruff rather than harsh, and when he turned back to his ledger, she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. An hour later, Willa sat on the bench of a heavily loaded wagon, dressed in a simple cotton work dress, sturdy boots, and a warm jacket that Mrs. Henderson had insisted she would need once they got higher into the mountains. Her costume dress was folded carefully in a bundle, along with 2 other practical dresses, spare undergarments, and other necessities that Mrs. Henderson had deemed essential. The store owner had also packed a bundle of food for the journey, refusing to take the meat beyond what Zachariah would settle later. You take care up there, Mrs. Henderson had said as she helped Willa into the wagon. Zachariah Pike is a good man, one of the best, but that mountain changes people, makes them hard. Do not let it make you hard too. Now, as the wagon pulled away from Bozeman and began the long climb into the high country, Willa tried to process everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. This morning she had been an actress, part of a troupe, heading toward what she had hoped would be a better future. Now she was heading into the mountains with a man she did not know, to do work she had never done. In a place she could not even imagine, Zachariah Pike drove the wagon with easy competence, his large hands steady on the reins, his attention on the rough trail ahead. He had not spoken since they left town, and Willa was content to let the silence stretch. She was too busy taking in the landscape, the way the valley fell away behind them and the mountains rose ahead, their slopes covered in dense pine forest that seemed to go on forever. The air grew cooler as they climbed, fresher, scented with pine and something else she could not name, something wild and untamed. The trail was rough, winding through stands of timber and across streams that ran clear and cold. Once, she saw a deer watching them from the shadows of the trees, its eyes wide and dark before it bounded away. Beautiful, is it not? Willa turned to find Zachariah watching her with an expression she could not read. It is, she admitted. I have never seen anything like it. In St. Louis, the only trees were in parks, and they were tame things, planted in rows. This feels different. Wild. It is wild, he agreed. That is what I love about it. Up here, a man is what he makes of himself. No society rules, no expectations, no pretending to be something you are not. Just the work and the mountain and the sky. It sounds lonely. Sometimes it is. But sometimes lonely is better than the alternative. He guided the wagon around a particularly rough section of trail, his attention focused entirely on the task. Once they were on smoother ground, he continued. I grew up in Boston. My father wanted me to be a banker like him, wear a suit, sit behind a desk, count other people's money. I tried it for 3 years, and every day felt like I was suffocating, so I left, came west, worked as a trapper, then a guide, then started logging. Been up on this mountain for 5 years now, and I have not regretted it once. What about family? Friends? My father disowned me when I left, said I was throwing my life away. Maybe I was by his standards, but I would rather live a short life doing work I love than a long life being miserable. He glanced at her. What about you? Any family back in St. Louis? My mother died 6 months ago. It was just the 2 of us. My father died when I was young. No siblings, no other relatives that I know of. That is why I joined the troupe. I could not afford the boarding house on my own, and I did not want to end up in a factory or worse. So we are both running from something, Zachariah said quietly. Or running towards something, Willa countered. Maybe it is the same thing. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and less stern. Maybe it is, they continued climbing as the afternoon wore on. The trail grew steeper, the air thinner. Willa found herself breathing harder, her lungs working to adjust to the altitude. Zachariah noticed and slowed the horses, giving them frequent rests. During one such stop, he passed her a canteen of water and some of the bread Mrs. Henderson had packed. You will adjust in a few days, he told her. The altitude takes some getting used to. Drink plenty of water and do not try to do too much too fast. How high up is the camp? About 7,000 feet. We are at maybe 5,000 right now. You will feel it tonight. probably get a headache. I have some willow bark tea that helps." Willa nodded, filing the information away. Everything about this world was new and strange, and she would need to learn quickly if she was going to survive. Not just survive, she corrected herself. Thrive. She was done with merely surviving. They reached the logging camp as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible, like something from a painting rather than real life. The camp was more substantial than Willa had expected. There was a large cabin with a stone chimney, a smaller bunkhouse, a stable for the horses and oxen, and various sheds and work areas. Logs were stacked in neat piles, and she could see the stumps of felled trees scattered across a cleared area that extended into the forest. 2 men emerged from the bunkhouse as the wagon pulled in. Both were young, probably in their mid-20s, and both stopped short when they saw Willa. "Boss, you did not say you were bringing back a woman," one of them said, his tone somewhere between surprise and concern. "Plans changed," Zachariah said, swinging down from the wagon with easy grace despite his size. "Miss Ortega will be doing the cooking and camp maintenance for a while." "Miss Ortega, this is Jack Brennan and Tom Wheeler. They are good workers and they will treat you with respect or answer to me." The message in his tone was clear as a bell, and both men nodded quickly. "Pleased to meet you, miss," Jack said. He was shorter than his companion, stocky and strong-looking with red hair and a sunburned face. "Any chance you actually know how to cook? Because Tom's beans are enough to kill a man." "I heard that," Tom said, but he was grinning. He was taller and leaner, with dark hair and an easy smile. "Welcome to the mountain, Miss Ortega. It is not much, but it is home." Willa climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the long ride. "Thank you, and yes, I can cook better than beans. At least, I hope I can." Zachariah was already unloading supplies from the wagon, and the 2 younger men moved to help him. Willa started to join them, but Zachariah waved her toward the cabin. "Go inside and get acquainted with the kitchen. There is a stove, cooking implements, whatever you need should be there. We have plenty of supplies. Make whatever you can for dinner. We are not particular, just hungry." The cabin's interior was surprisingly comfortable. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with benches, some chairs and shelves lined with books and supplies. A door on one side led to what appeared to be Zachariah's private quarters, and another door led to a small room with a narrow bed and a trunk for storage. "That is your room," Zachariah said from behind her, making her jump. He was carrying her small bundle of belongings. "It is not much, but it is private. The stove is through here." He led her to a section of the cabin that served as the kitchen. There was indeed a wood stove, already supplied with fuel, and shelves stocked with flour, salt, sugar, coffee, dried beans, rice, and various other staples. Hanging from the ceiling were bunches of dried herbs and strings of onions and garlic. A door led outside to what she assumed was a cold storage area. "The creek is about 50 yards that direction," Zachariah said, pointing. "Fresh water, cold enough to hurt your teeth. We have root vegetables stored outside, and we hunt for meat regularly. There are chickens in a coop behind the bunkhouse, so we have eggs. If you need something we do not have, make a list and I will pick it up next time I go to town." Willa surveyed the kitchen, her mind already cataloging possibilities. "This is more than I expected. I can work with this good. I will leave you to it then. Take your time getting settled. We can wait another hour for dinner if you need it." After he left, Willa stood in the middle of the kitchen and let out a long breath. This was her life now. A cabin on a mountain, cooking for 3 men she barely knew, miles from anything resembling civilization. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something unexpected: excitement. She set to work. An hour and a half later, she called the men in for dinner. She had made biscuits from scratch, fried salt pork with onions and potatoes, and used some of the dried apples she had found to make a simple sauce sweetened with a touch of sugar. It was not fancy, but it was hot and filling and made with care. The men ate like they had not seen food in a week, barely pausing to breathe between bites. Zachariah finished first, leaning back on the bench with an expression of contentment that made him look years younger. "Miss Ortega, if you cook like this every day, you can stay as long as you want. It is just simple food," Willa said, but she could not help the pleased flush that warmed her cheeks. "It is good food," Jack said around a mouthful of biscuit. "That is what matters, Tom. You are off cooking duty permanently." "Thank God," Tom said with feeling. "I never wanted that job in the first place." They talked while they ate, the men sharing stories about their work, discussing plans for the next few days of logging. Willa listened, learning the rhythms of their lives, the concerns that drove their days. It was clear that Zachariah was well respected, that his word was law on this mountain, but that he earned that respect through fairness and hard work, rather than tyranny. After dinner, the men insisted on cleaning up while Willa explored her new quarters. The small room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in quilts, a trunk for her belongings, and a window that looked out over the forest. She could hear the distant sound of the creek and the wind in the pines, and for the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. She changed into her nightgown and was about to crawl into bed when there was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Zachariah standing there with a steaming mug in his hand. "Willow bark tea," he said. "For the altitude headache, you will thank me in the morning." She had not even noticed the dull ache behind her eyes until he mentioned it. She took the mug, their fingers brushing briefly, and felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. His hands were calloused and warm, the hands of a man who worked with them every day. "Thank you for everything. The clothes, the food, this opportunity. You did not have to help me, but you did." "My mountain could use some drama," he said, and there was that almost smile again. "Figured an actress was just what we needed." "I thought you said no drama." "I said no theatrics. Drama is different. Drama is passion, emotion, someone who feels things deeply. This mountain strips away pretense. Maybe that is the kind of drama we need." He nodded toward the mug. "Drink that while it is hot. Get some rest. Tomorrow I will show you around properly, introduce you to the chickens and the root cellar and everything else. After that you are on your own. I will not let you down." "I know you will not," he said quietly. "Good night, Miss Ortega." "Good night, Mr. Pike, and please call me Willa." "Then you should call me Zachariah, or Zach if you prefer." After he left, Willa sat on her bed and sipped the bitter tea, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she had been abandoned and desperate. Tonight she had a job, a place to sleep, and the beginnings of something that might become a future. She did not know what that future held, but for the first time in a long time she was curious to find out. The days fell into a rhythm. Willa woke before dawn to start the breakfast, feeding the men well before they headed out to their logging work. While they were gone, she cleaned the cabin, tended the chickens, washed clothes in the creek, and prepared dinner. The work was hard and constant, but it was also satisfying in a way her theatrical performances had never been. There was something honest about it, something real. Zachariah was true to his word about showing her around the camp. He spent an entire morning walking her through every aspect of the operation, explaining how they selected trees for felling, how they seasoned and processed the timber, where they stored tools and supplies. He introduced her to the horses and oxen, magnificent beasts that did the heavy work of hauling logs. He showed her the root cellar, dug deep into the hillside and stocked with vegetables and preserved foods. "We are mostly self-sufficient up here," he explained as they walked through the forest, following a narrow trail. "Have to be. Once winter sets in, we cannot get down the mountain for weeks or even months at a time. So we plan ahead, stock up, make sure we have everything we need. Does not that get claustrophobic? Being trapped up here with the same few people for months? You would think so, but no. The mountain is big enough that you can find solitude when you need it, and the work keeps us busy. Plus, when you choose to be somewhere, it does not feel like a trap. It feels like home." They had stopped at a clearing that overlooked the valley far below. From this height, Bozeman looked like a collection of toy buildings, and the surrounding landscape stretched out in every direction, endless and magnificent. Willa felt her breath catch at the beauty of it. "I understand why you love it here," she said softly. "It is like being on top of the world." "It is," Zachariah agreed. He was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. "When I first came up here, I thought I was running away. Took me a while to realize I was actually running toward something. This. Peace, purpose, a life that makes sense. What about companionship? Do not you get lonely?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Sometimes, but lonely is better than being surrounded by people who do not understand you. At least, that is what I used to think, and now." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his pale eyes made her heart skip. "Now I am not so sure. Maybe the right companionship makes all the difference." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Willa could not quite name. Then Zachariah cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the connection. "We should head back. The men will be breaking for lunch soon, and they will riot if there is no food waiting." As the weeks passed, Willa found herself settling into life on the mountain in ways she had not anticipated. The hard work agreed with her, strengthening her body and clearing her mind. She learned to read the weather by watching the sky, to predict when they would need extra firewood by the way the wind shifted. She learned the names of the birds that visited the camp and the tracks of the animals that passed through at night. She also learned about the men she lived among. Jack was good-natured and reliable, The kind of person who would give you his last penny if you needed it. Tom was quieter but observant, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. Both men treated her with unfailing respect, never crossing the lines of propriety that Zachariah had established, and Zachariah himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly kind but kept a certain distance, as though afraid to let her see too much of who he really was beneath the rough exterior. She would catch him watching her sometimes, when he thought she was not looking, his expression thoughtful and unguarded. But whenever she met his eyes, he would look away, that wall coming down again. She found herself thinking about him more than she should. The way his muscles moved when he worked, the sound of his rare laughter, the unexpected gentleness in his large hands when he handled an injured animal or mended something broken. He was everything the men in St. Louis had not been: honest, capable, unafraid of hard work. There was nothing soft about him, but there was a core of decency that ran deeper than any polish or refinement could create. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Willa was sitting on the porch of the cabin watching the sunset when Zachariah joined her. He had a mug of coffee in each hand and offered her one before settling onto the step beside her. "Your trial month is up," he said without preamble. "I figure we should talk about whether you want to stay on." Willa's heart sank, though she tried not to show it. She had known this conversation was coming, but she had not been prepared for how much she did not want to leave. "Have I done something wrong?" "Wrong? No. You have exceeded every expectation I had. The men are happier, the camp runs smoother, and I have not had to eat Tom's cooking in a month. That alone is worth your wages. Then I would like to stay, if the offer is still open." "It is, with a raise. $25 a month. You have earned it." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by something warmer. "Thank you, that is generous. It is fair." He sipped his coffee, his gaze on the darkening sky. "I have to admit, when I agreed to hire you, I thought you would last maybe a week before begging to go back to town. I figured you were too refined, too used to theater life and audiences and applause. I am glad I was wrong." "I think I was wrong too," Willa said slowly. "I thought I needed the theater to be happy, to feel alive, but I have felt more alive up here in a month than I did in 3 months with the troupe. There is something about this place, about the work, about the honesty of it all. It is like I can finally breathe." Zachariah turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were luminous. "I know exactly what you mean. That is how I felt when I first came here. Like I had been holding my breath my whole life and could finally let it out. Do you ever miss Boston, your family?" "No, that life was not mine. It belonged to the person my father wanted me to be, but it was never going to fit. Up here I can be who I actually am. That is worth more than any inheritance or family approval." Willa thought about her own life, the years spent trying to make her mother proud, trying to find a place where she belonged. "I think I am beginning to understand that. The troupe never felt right either. I kept thinking I needed to try harder, be better, and then it would feel like home. But it never did. This," though she gestured at the cabin, the forest, the mountains rising around them, "this feels right. I cannot explain it, but it does." "You do not have to explain it. Some things just are." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, countless and brilliant in the clear mountain air. Willa was intensely aware of Zachariah beside her, the solid warmth of his presence, the quiet strength he exuded. She wanted to lean against him, to feel his arm around her shoulders, and the wanting was so strong it almost frightened her. "Willa," he said quietly, and something in his tone made her turn to face him. "I should probably tell you that having you here has been complicated." "Complicated how?" He set down his coffee mug and ran a hand through his long hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "I came up to this mountain to be alone, to work and live and not have to deal with other people's complications. And for 5 years that worked fine. Then you showed up in that ridiculous dress, looking like you had just stepped out of a play, asking for work you clearly had no experience doing. And I should have said no. Should have given you some money and sent you on your way. But you did not." "No, I did not. Because there was something in your eyes, some determination or strength, and I recognized it. I knew what it was like to be desperate and alone and willing to do whatever it took to survive. So I said yes, thinking it would be a temporary thing, that you would realize this life was not for you and leave. But you did not leave. You stayed and you worked and you fit into this place like you had always been here." And now he broke off, shaking his head. "Now?" Willa prompted, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Now I am having thoughts I have no business having, about a woman who works for me, who depends on me for her livelihood, which makes me no better than those theater managers who probably spent the whole tour making you uncomfortable." "You are nothing like them," Willa said fiercely. "Nothing. They saw me as an object, something to use. You have treated me with respect and kindness from the moment we met. If you are having thoughts, Zachariah, maybe it is because I am having the same ones." He went very still. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I think about you, more than I should. I notice things, like the way you smile when you think no one is looking, or how gentle you are with the animals, or how your whole face changes when you talk about this mountain. I find myself looking for excuses to be near you, and I do not think that is wrong. I think it is human." "Willa, I am not asking you for anything," she said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that if you are interested, I am not opposed. More than not opposed, I am interested too." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. Then slowly he reached out and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his calloused fingers infinitely gentle against her cheek. "I have never met anyone like you," he said softly. "You are brave and honest and stronger than you think you are. And yes, I am interested, more than interested. But I want to do this right, no rushing, no taking advantage. If something is going to happen between us, it needs to be real and honest, and because we both want it, not because you are grateful or I am lonely." "I understand," Willa whispered, leaning into his touch, "and I agree." He smiled then, a real genuine smile that transformed his face. "Good, then we will take this slow, get to know each other properly. And we will see where it leads." "Where do you think it will lead, honestly?" "I am hoping it leads to everything. But we have time to find out." He was right, they had time. And for the first time in her life, Willa felt like she had found someone worth taking that time with. The next weeks were a revelation. Zachariah kept his word about taking things slow. But slow did not mean distant. He began seeking out her company in the evenings, sitting with her on the porch or walking with her through the forest before dinner. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, the books they had read, and the places they hoped to see someday. Willa learned that beneath his rough exterior, Zachariah was well educated and thoughtful, a man who read poetry and philosophy when he was not felling trees. He had left Boston not out of laziness or failure, but because he refused to live a life that felt like a lie. His father had called him ungrateful and foolish, but Zachariah had walked away with his head high, determined to build a life on his own terms. "I have never regretted it," he told her one evening as they sat by the creek, their boots off and their feet in the cold water. "Even when it was hard, even when I was eating nothing but hardtack and sleeping under trees, I never regretted choosing freedom over comfort." "What about love?" Willa asked. "Did you give up on that too?" "I did not think about it much. Figured I had chosen a solitary life and that was the price. But lately I have been wondering if maybe I gave up too soon. If maybe the right person would not see this life as a sacrifice but as an adventure." He was looking at her as he said it, and Willa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I think you are right. I think the right person would love this life. The freedom of it, the honesty, the beauty." "And what do you think, Willa? Is this life something you could love long term? Not just for now, but for years to come?" She thought about it seriously because he deserved an honest answer. "A year ago I would have said no. I thought I needed cities and people and the excitement of performing. But I was wrong. What I needed was a place where I could be myself, where my work mattered, where I was valued for what I could do rather than how I looked or what connections I had. This mountain gives me that." "You give me that. You give me something too," he said quietly. "You give me a reason to come back to the cabin at night. Before you came, this place was just where I worked and slept. Now it feels like home. That is because of you." Their relationship deepened through shared moments and small gestures. Zachariah began leaving wildflowers on the kitchen table, picked from the meadows during his morning walks. Willa started leaving fresh coffee ready for him before dawn, knowing he liked to sit and watch the sunrise before starting his work. They found excuses to touch: a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed a plate, his arm around her waist as he helped her over rough ground on their walks. The physical attraction between them was undeniable but remained unacted upon, a tension that hummed beneath every interaction. Willa caught herself watching the way his muscles moved when he worked, the flex of his shoulders and arms as he swung an axe. She dreamed about what it would feel like to run her hands through his long hair, to feel those strong arms around her, and she could tell he was similarly affected. She saw the way his eyes followed her movements, the way his jaw tightened when she laughed at something Jack or Tom said, the way he always positioned himself between her and any potential danger, even if that danger was just an uneven path or a steep drop. One afternoon in late September, Willa was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard shouting from the work area. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran toward the sound, her heart in her throat. She found Jack and Tom supporting Zachariah between them, his face pale and his left arm hanging at an odd angle. Blood seeped through his shirt sleeve, and when his eyes met hers, she saw pain there, tightly controlled but real. "What happened?" she demanded, already moving to help. "Tree fell wrong," Tom said grimly. "Caught him with a branch on the way down. Think his arm is broken." They got him into the cabin and onto his bed, and Willa sent Jack for water and clean cloths while she carefully cut away his shirt sleeve to assess the damage. The break was clean, the bone not protruding, but there was a deep gash that would need stitching. She had helped her mother treat injuries before, but never something this serious. Never on someone she cared about this much. "This is going to hurt," she told Zachariah, meeting his eyes. "I need to clean the wound and set the bone before I can stitch it." "I know. Just do it." His voice was tight with pain, but his gaze was steady. "Tom, hold him down. Jack, bring me whiskey and the sewing kit, and boil some water." For the next hour, Willa worked with steady hands and a racing heart, cleaning the wound, setting the broken bone as gently as she could while Zachariah bit down on a leather strap to keep from crying out, and then stitching the gash with small, careful stitches. Tom held him still throughout, and by the end, all three men were sweating. When it was done, Willa bound Zachariah's arm in a splint made from strips of wood and clean cloth, then covered him with a quilt. He had passed out from the pain at some point, which was probably a mercy. She sat beside him, wiping his face with a cool cloth, and tried not to think about how close he had come to being killed. "He will be all right," Jack said from the doorway. "Thanks to you. That was good work, Miss Willa. He needs to rest. No working for at least 6 weeks, maybe more. We will manage. Tom and I can handle the logging. You just focus on getting him well again." Over the next few days, Willa became Zachariah's constant nurse. She brought him meals, changed his bandages, brewed willow bark tea for the pain, and sat with him during the long nights when the pain kept him from sleeping. He was a terrible patient, restless and frustrated by his enforced inactivity, but he softened under her care. "You should not have to do this," he told her on the third day, when she was helping him eat soup because he could not manage it one-handed. "This is not what I hired you for. No, you hired me to cook and clean. But I am doing this because I want to, because I care about you. There is a difference. Willa, do not argue with me. You are hurt and you need help. Let me help you." He subsided, but she saw something in his eyes, a vulnerability he usually kept hidden. "I am not good at being helpless." "You are not helpless. You are healing, and you do not have to be strong all the time, Zachariah. Not with me." That night, when she checked on him before going to her own room, she found him awake and staring at the ceiling. She sat on the edge of his bed, concerned. "Are you in pain? I can make more tea." "No, I mean yes, it hurts, but that is not why I am awake." He turned his head to look at her, and in the lamplight, his eyes were intense. "I have been thinking about what you said, about not having to be strong all the time. I have spent so many years being self-reliant, depending on no one, that I forgot what it was like to have someone care, to have someone want to take care of me, and it scares me a little, how much I like it, how much I have come to need you." Willa felt her throat tighten. "You do not have to be scared. I am not going anywhere. But what if something happens? What if you change your mind, or you get tired of this life, or what if none of that happens?" She interrupted gently. "What if I stay and we build something together and it is exactly what we both need? You cannot live your life afraid of what might go wrong. Zachariah, sometimes you have to take a risk." He reached up with his good hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. "You are the best risk I have ever taken." Willa leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "Then keep taking it, keep letting me in. I promise I will not hurt you. I know you will not, at least not on purpose, and I will not hurt you either. That is a promise." They stayed like that for a long moment, close but not quite kissing, savoring the intimacy of the connection. Then Willa pulled back, smoothing his hair from his forehead. "Get some rest. You need to heal. Will you stay? Just until I fall asleep?" She settled into the chair beside his bed, taking his good hand in hers. "I will stay as long as you need me to." As September turned to October, Zachariah healed slowly but surely. His arm remained splinted, but the wound closed cleanly and the pain diminished to a dull ache. He chafed at his inability to work, but Willa kept him occupied with books and conversation and short walks around the camp when the weather permitted. The forest was transforming around them, the aspens turning brilliant gold, the air growing crisper with the promise of winter. Willa had never experienced a mountain autumn before, and she was entranced by the beauty of it, the way the whole world seemed to be on fire with color. One afternoon, Zachariah insisted on walking with her to a meadow he wanted to show her. It was farther than he had walked since the accident, and Willa watched him carefully for signs of fatigue or pain. But he seemed determined, leading her along a narrow trail that wound through the golden forest until they emerged into a clearing carpeted with wildflowers that should not have still been blooming this late in the season. "It is a warm pocket," Zachariah explained, gesturing around them. "Something about the way the mountains protect this spot, it stays warmer longer than the surrounding areas. I found it my first year up here and I have been coming back ever since. I have never shown it to anyone else." "It is magical," Willa breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Asters and goldenrod and late-blooming lupine created a tapestry of purple and gold, and the air was thick with the scent of flowers and sun-warmed grass. "I wanted you to see it before winter comes. Once the snow starts, this place will be buried until spring." They sat in the middle of the meadow, and Willa leaned carefully against Zachariah's good side, mindful of his injury. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders and they sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. "I have been thinking," Zachariah said eventually, "about the future, about what happens when winter comes and we are snowed in together for months, about what happens in the spring when the trails open again." "What have you been thinking?" Willa asked, though her heart was already beating faster. "I have been thinking that I do not want you to be my employee anymore. I want you to be my partner. In the business, in this life, in everything." Willa sat up so she could see his face. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Willa Ortega. I have been in love with you since about the second week you were here, when you scared off a bear by banging pots together and yelling at it like it was a naughty child. I love your courage and your honesty, and the way you laugh at Tom's terrible jokes. I love how you sing while you cook and how you are not afraid of hard work. I love that you chose this life, this mountain, even though it is nothing like what you knew before. And I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, if you will let me." Tears were streaming down Willa's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "I love you too. I think I started loving you that first day, when you gave me a chance even though I was clearly ridiculous in that costume dress. You saw something in me that I did not see in myself. You gave me a home when I had nothing, and you never made me feel like I had to be anything other than who I am. So yes, Zachariah Pike, yes to all of it." He kissed her then, finally, his good hand cupping the back of her head and drawing her close. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though he was afraid she might vanish if he held on too tight. But Willa pressed closer, her hands coming up to frame his face, and the kiss deepened into something fierce and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zachariah rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have a ring, did not exactly plan this. I do not need a ring, I just need you. You have me, for as long as you want me, you have me. Then I guess we should think about making this official. Is there a preacher in Bozeman?" "There is. But the trails are already getting tricky. We might have to wait until spring." Willa shook her head. "No waiting. If we have to snowshoe down that mountain to find a preacher, then that is what we will do. I am not spending another day not being your wife." Zachariah laughed, the sound rich and joyful. "You are something else, you know that?" "I know. That is why you love me. Damn right it is." They made it down to Bozeman a week later, on a clear day between early snowfalls. Zachariah's arm was healing well enough that he could manage the wagon, though Willa insisted on doing most of the work. They were married in a simple ceremony at the small church, with Mrs. Henderson and the minister's wife as witnesses. Willa wore one of her simple work dresses, and Zachariah wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard for the occasion, though he refused to cut his hair. "It keeps my neck warm in winter," he told her when she teased him about it. "Practical. I like it long," Willa admitted. "It suits you." After the ceremony, Mrs. Henderson insisted on hosting a small celebration at the general store, providing a simple cake and coffee for the handful of townsfolk who had gathered to congratulate them. The store owner pulled Willa aside at one point, her eyes bright with tears. "I am so glad it worked out," she said, squeezing Willa's hands. "When I sent you to find Zachariah, I hoped he would help you. But I never imagined this. You are good for each other. Anyone can see that. Thank you for believing in me when I had nothing," Willa said, embracing the older woman. "I will never forget your kindness. You just be happy, child. That is all the thanks I need." They spent their wedding night at the boarding house in Bozeman, in a room that was warm and private, and far more comfortable than anything the mountain had to offer. Zachariah was gentle with her, mindful of his healing arm but also of her inexperience. He took his time, showing her with his hands and mouth and body just how much he loved her. And Willa discovered a passion in herself she had not known existed. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his broad chest, she felt completely safe and completely happy for the first time in her life. "No regrets?" Zachariah murmured, his fingers trailing up and down her spine. Not a single one, you. Only that we did not do this sooner. Willa laughed and pressed a kiss to his chest. We had to wait until you fell off a ladder and nearly broke your arm. It was romantic. That was a tree, not a ladder. And it was very romantic in a painful, terrifying sort of way. They returned to the mountain the next day, newly married and happier than either had thought possible. Winter arrived in earnest a week later, blanketing the world in snow and sealing them away from the outside world. But instead of feeling trapped, Willa felt cocooned, safe in their cabin with the man she loved. The winter months were long but not lonely. Jack and Tom lived in the bunkhouse, coming to the main cabin for meals and company, but respecting the newlyweds' privacy. They worked when the weather permitted, maintaining equipment and planning for the spring logging season. When storms made outside work impossible, they gathered around the fire, and Willa entertained them with stories and dramatic readings from books, her theatrical training finally finding a perfect audience. "You are wasted on us," Tom said one evening after she had performed a particularly moving monologue from Shakespeare. "You should be on a real stage somewhere, with hundreds of people watching." "I am exactly where I want to be," Willa said, settling back against Zachariah's side. "This is my stage now, and you are my audience. It is enough." "More than enough," Zachariah added, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It is perfect." As winter deepened, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, a missed monthly course followed by morning sickness that Zachariah noticed before she did, bringing her tea and crackers before she even got out of bed. "How did you know?" she asked one morning, after the nausea had passed. "My mother had 6 children. I remember how it was for her at the beginning. Are you happy about it?" Willa thought about it seriously. A baby would complicate their lives, make everything harder. But when she imagined holding a child with Zachariah's blue eyes or her dark hair, her heart swelled with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "I am terrified," she admitted, "and thrilled, and happy." "Yes, I am very happy." "Good, so am I." He gathered her into his arms, careful not to jostle her upset stomach. "We will figure it out together, all of it, I promise." The baby was born in late summer of the following year, a healthy boy with his father's pale eyes and a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. Willa labored through a long night and into the next day, with Zachariah at her side the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, Zachariah cut the cord with shaking hands and placed their son in Willa's arms with an expression of such wonder that she started crying all over again. "He is perfect," Zachariah whispered, one large finger stroking the baby's tiny hand. "You are perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Willa said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son's small, serious face, Zachariah said, "I was thinking about my grandfather. His name was William. We could call him that, honor both our families." "William Pike." Willa tested the name. "Will. I like it. William it is." Young Will proved to be a healthy, happy baby who fit into mountain life as easily as his mother had. He slept through the sound of axes and saws, woke cheerfully at dawn, and by his first birthday was crawling fearlessly around the camp, investigating everything with chubby hands and a determined expression that reminded everyone of his father. Jack and Tom doted on him shamelessly, carving him toys and making faces to get him to laugh. The logging operation thrived, Zachariah's reputation for quality timber spreading through Montana and beyond. They took on additional workers during the busy seasons but kept the operation small and manageable, focused on quality over quantity. Willa continued to manage the camp, cooking and keeping accounts and raising their son, but she never felt like she had sacrificed anything. This life, this mountain, this man, they were everything she had never known to want but now could not imagine living without. 2 years after Will was born, Willa gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after the wildflowers that bloomed in Zachariah's secret meadow every spring. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's calm temperament, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons. Winters spent snowed in and cozy, springs full of new growth and hard work, summers blazing with heat and long days, autumns painted in gold and preparing for the cold to come. The children grew strong and capable, learning to ride horses and identify trees and read the weather. Will showed an aptitude for the logging work, following his father with a toy axe from the time he could walk. Rose was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of books that reminded Zachariah of himself. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zachariah took Willa back to the meadow where he had proposed, leaving the children with Jack and Tom for the afternoon. The wildflowers were in full bloom, the air warm and sweet, and they lay in the grass together like they had that first time. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not hired you that day? Zachariah asked, his fingers laced with hers. If I had just given you money and sent you back to St. Louis or on to Virginia City? Sometimes, Willa admitted, but then I realize it does not matter, because you did hire me. We found each other. That is what matters. I used to think I needed to be alone to be happy, Zachariah said quietly. Thought other people just complicated things, made life harder, but you taught me that the right person does not complicate your life. They complete it. You made my mountain into a home, Willa. You gave me a family and a future and reasons to laugh. You gave me everything. You gave me everything too, Willa said, rolling onto her side so she could look at him. A home, a purpose, children, love. You saw me when I was broken and lost, and you helped me put myself back together. And then you loved all the pieces, even the ones that were jagged and did not fit quite right. All the pieces fit perfectly, Zachariah said, pulling her close. Every single one. They kissed in the meadow, the same meadow where their life together had truly begun. And Willa thought about that girl in the ridiculous yellow costume dress, standing in a dusty street with 3 pennies and no hope. If she could go back and tell that girl what was waiting for her on a mountain in Montana, she would not have believed it. Sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming. The children were 5 and 3 when Willa received a letter that had been forwarded through half a dozen post offices before finding its way to Bozeman. It was from a lawyer in St. Louis, informing her that a distant aunt she had never met had died and left her a small inheritance. Not a fortune, but enough money to be significant. She showed the letter to Zachariah that evening, after the children were asleep. He read it carefully, then looked at her with raised eyebrows. That is a substantial amount. What do you want to do with it? I have been thinking, Willa said slowly. The camp is doing well, but we could expand. Build a proper mill, hire more men, process the timber ourselves instead of selling raw logs. It would mean more work, but also more profit, more stability for our family's future, or, Zachariah said thoughtfully, we could use it to build a proper house. Something with real bedrooms for the children, a big kitchen for you, maybe even a parlor with windows overlooking the valley. The cabin has served us well, but we are outgrowing it. Willa considered both options seriously. Finally, she said, what if we do both? Use half for the house and half for expanding the business. That way we are investing in our family and our future at the same time. Zachariah smiled, that full, genuine smile that still made her heart skip even after 5 years of marriage. That sounds perfect. You are brilliant, you know that? I know, she said with mock seriousness. That is why you married me, one of many reasons. They spent the next year building. A proper house rose on a slight rise above the original cabin. 2 stories with real glass windows and a stone fireplace large enough to heat the entire structure. They kept the cabin for storage and as quarters for their workers during the busy season. A small mill was constructed near the work area, with equipment brought up the mountain piece by piece and assembled by skilled craftsmen from Bozeman. The work was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but it was also exciting. Willa threw herself into planning and organizing, her theatrical experience proving surprisingly useful when it came to coordinating multiple workers and keeping complex projects on schedule. Zachariah handled the physical labor and the technical aspects, his years of experience making him invaluable. When the house was finally finished, they moved in on a crisp October afternoon, with Will and Rose racing through the rooms and exclaiming over the wonder of having their own spaces. That night, after the children were asleep in their new bedrooms, Zachariah and Willa stood on the wide porch and looked out over their mountain. We built something, Zachariah said, his arm around her waist. Not just a house or a business, but a life. A real life that is ours and no one else's. The acting troupe left me behind, Willa said, echoing words she had not thought about in years, and at the time it felt like the end of the world. But it was actually the beginning of this. My mountain needed some drama, Zachariah said with a laugh. And you gave it that and so much more, your mountain? Willa turned to face him, one eyebrow raised. I think you mean our mountain. Our mountain, he agreed, pulling her close. Our mountain, our home, our life. All of it together. They kissed as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Somewhere in the house, one of the children called out in their sleep, and Zachariah went to check on them, while Willa stood on the porch a moment longer, breathing in the cool evening air and feeling nothing but gratitude for every twist of fate that had led her here. The years continued to pass, each one building on the last. The Pike Timber Company, as it was officially named, became known throughout Montana for quality lumber and fair dealing. Will grew into a young man who looked so much like his father it was startling, taking over more and more of the logging operations as Zachariah transitioned into managing the business side. Rose developed a talent for drawing, creating detailed sketches of the forest and mountains that Willa encouraged with art supplies ordered from as far away as San Francisco. When Will was 15, he asked his father if they could hire a teacher to come up the mountain for a few months each year to ensure that he and Rose received a proper education. Zachariah agreed, and for the next several years, a young teacher from Bozeman spent summers at the camp, teaching the Pike children and any of the workers' children who wanted to learn. Rose proved to be a brilliant student, devouring books on science and mathematics along with literature and history. When she was 16, she announced her intention to attend college back east, a declaration that initially shocked both her parents. "College?" Zachariah said, clearly struggling with the idea of his daughter leaving the mountain. "That is a long way from home." "It is," Rose agreed calmly. "But you left Boston to find your path, Father. I need to find mine too. And I think it might lead through a classroom in a university, not through a forest on a mountain." Willa watched the conflict play across her husband's face, understanding both his fear and his pride. Finally, she squeezed his hand and said gently, "She is right. We cannot ask her to limit her dreams just because they are different from ours. If Rose wants college, we find a way to make it happen. But she is so young. I was younger than Rose when I was abandoned in Bozeman with 3 pennies and a costume dress," Willa reminded him. "And I survived. Our daughter is strong and smart and capable. We raised her to be those things. Now we have to trust that we did our job well." Zachariah was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are right. You are always right about these things. College it is, then, but we visit regularly and she comes home every summer." "Deal," Rose said, hugging her father fiercely. "Thank you for understanding." Will had no interest in college, perfectly content to take over the family business. He married at 21, a capable young woman from Bozeman named Sarah who adapted to mountain life with the same determination Willa had shown years earlier. They built their own house near the main house, starting their own family and ensuring that the Pike legacy would continue. Rose did go to college, studying biology and returning home with a degree and a professor husband, who was initially horrified by the rugged mountain life but gradually came to love it as much as she did. They built a small laboratory where Rose conducted research on forest ecology, her work eventually being published in scientific journals and consulted by conservationists across the West. Through it all, Willa and Zachariah remained the heart of the growing Pike compound. Their love, which had started with a desperate woman in a yellow dress and a mountain man who took a chance, had grown into something legendary among the people who knew them. They were partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges, and never taking for granted the gift of having found each other. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family for celebration. Will and Sarah were there with their 3 children. Rose and her husband had traveled from their research station in Wyoming. Jack and Tom, now in their 50s but still working the camps, came to the main house bearing a cake they had somehow managed to make without burning down the bunkhouse. After dinner, Zachariah stood and raised his glass. 25 years ago, I was a stubborn man who thought he needed to be alone to be happy. Then a woman showed up in the most ridiculous yellow dress I had ever seen, asking for a job she had no business doing, and I made the best decision of my life. I said yes. Willa, you turned my mountain into a home, my loneliness into joy, and my solitary existence into a family. You gave me everything I did not know I was missing. Here is to 25 more years, if we are lucky, and to the love that makes every single day worth living. Willa was crying as she stood to join him, her hand in his. And here is to the man who saw potential in a desperate actress and gave her a chance, who built a life with me in these mountains, who gave me children and grandchildren and a love that has never wavered. You are my heart, Zachariah Pike, today, tomorrow, always. They kissed to cheers and applause from their family, and Willa thought about that girl in the yellow dress one more time. If she could go back and tell her that being abandoned in Bozeman was the best thing that ever happened to her, that it led to a life richer and fuller than any stage performance could ever be, would she believe it? Probably not. But it would not matter, because that girl would find her way here eventually. Find her way to this mountain, to this man, to this love. Some things were simply meant to be. As the celebration continued around them, Zachariah pulled Willa outside onto the porch, wanting a moment alone with his wife. The sky was clear and full of stars, the air cool and scented with pine. From inside they could hear their children's laughter, their grandchildren's voices, the sound of family and life and happiness. Any regrets? Zachariah asked, the same question he had asked on their wedding night all those years ago. Not a single one, Willa answered, the same answer she had given then. You, only that I did not find you sooner, but maybe we both needed to go through what we did to appreciate what we have. Maybe, Willa agreed. Or maybe we found each other exactly when we were supposed to. I love you, Willa Pike. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. I love you too, always. They stood together on the porch of the house they had built, on the mountain they had made their own, surrounded by the family they had created, and Willa felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for a troupe that had abandoned her, for a mountain man who had taken a chance, for a life that had surprised her at every turn with its beauty and fullness. The acting troupe had left her behind without pay, thinking they were abandoning her to nothing. Instead, they had given her everything. And the mountain man who said his mountain could use some drama had been right. It needed drama and passion and love. It needed her, just as she had needed it. And together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. A legacy of love and hard work and determination, passed down through generations, all because of a chance meeting in a dusty Montana town, and two people brave enough to take a risk on each other. Years continued to flow like the seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Willa and Zachariah grew older together gracefully, their hair turning silver but their love remaining as strong as ever. They handed over more and more of the business operations to Will and eventually to their grandchildren, content to spend their days in quiet companionship. They took long walks through the forest they had spent a lifetime protecting and nurturing. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains. They read books together, shared meals, and entertained a steady stream of children and grandchildren who came to visit the matriarch and patriarch of the Pike family. On their 40th anniversary, too old now for big celebrations, they sat together in Zachariah's secret meadow one last time. The flowers were blooming as they had every year, and the air was warm and perfect. 40 years, Zachariah said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you walked into that saloon in your yellow dress. Other times it feels like I have loved you my entire life. You have, Willa said, leaning against his shoulder. And I have loved you mine. Everything before we met was just preparation for this. For us, do you think the children understand how rare this is, what we have? I think they do. We showed them by example what love should look like, what partnership means. They will carry that forward. They sat in comfortable silence, two old people who had lived a full life together and regretted nothing. When they finally rose to return home, moving more slowly than they once had but still steady, Zachariah paused and pulled Willa into his arms. Thank you, he said simply, for saying yes to a mountain man with more dreams than sense, for building a life with me, for every single day of the last 40 years. Thank you for being the kind of man worth saying yes to, Willa replied, for giving me a home when I had nothing, for loving me exactly as I am, for everything and more, Zachariah agreed. They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, the same way they had faced every challenge and celebrated every joy for 4 decades. And as they sat on their porch that evening, surrounded by the sounds of their grandchildren playing and the beauty of the mountain they had made their own, they knew that they had succeeded in the most important task of all. They had built a love that would outlast them, that would echo through the generations, that would inspire their children's children to believe in the possibility of finding someone who made every day better, every challenge easier, every joy sweeter. The acting troupe had left Willa behind without pay, thinking they were leaving her with nothing. But they had actually given her the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to find her true home, her true love, her true purpose. And Zachariah, the mountain man who said his mountain could use some drama, had found his own gift in a desperate woman with a fierce heart and an unbreakable spirit. Together, they had proven that sometimes the best stories are the ones that start with endings. That sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. That sometimes a mountain needs an actress just as much as an actress needs a mountain. And they had lived happily ever after, in the truest sense of those words. Not because their life was perfect or easy, but because they faced it together, with love and determination, and an unwavering commitment to each other and the family they had built. Years later, long after Willa and Zachariah had passed on peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, their grandchildren would tell the story of how their grandparents met. The tale of a desperate actress in a yellow dress and a mountain man looking for help would become family legend, told and retold, embellished and cherished. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with two people who took a chance on each other and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. A love that started with nothing and became everything. A love that proved that sometimes the best dramas are not performed on stages but lived in the mountains, with hard work and honest hearts and the courage to say yes to possibility. The Pike family legacy continued for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story that began with an abandoned actress and a lonely mountain man. The timber company grew and evolved, adapting to changing times while never losing sight of the values Zachariah and Willa had established. Quality work, fair dealing, respect for the land, and always putting family first. The house on the mountain remained the family gathering place, carefully maintained and expanded over the years, but never losing its essential character. The original cabin where Willa had first cooked dinner for the crew was preserved as well, turned into a small museum that told the story of those early days. Rose's scientific work led to the establishment of a forest research center that bore her name, ensuring that the Pike commitment to conservation would outlast any single generation. Will's descendants continued running the timber operations, always balancing profit with sustainability, always remembering that the mountain had given them everything and deserved respect in return. And in that secret meadow, now protected as family land that would never be developed or logged, wildflowers continued to bloom every spring, a living testament to a love story that had begun with an ending and transformed into a beginning that never truly ended. The story of Willa and Zachariah became more than family history. It became a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are doorways to the best, that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters, that sometimes the love we need is not the love we are looking for, and the life we are meant to live is not the one we planned. Most importantly, their story proved that courage comes in many forms. The courage to leave everything behind and start over in a new place. The courage to take a chance on someone when every logical reason says not to. The courage to build a life based on love rather than expectation. The courage to say yes when everything else is telling you to say no. Willa Ortega had walked into Bozeman with 3 pennies and a costume dress, abandoned and desperate. Zachariah Pike had been a lonely man who thought solitude was the only path to happiness. Together, they had built an empire of love and family and purpose that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. And it all started because an acting troupe left a woman behind without pay, and a mountain man decided his mountain could use some drama. Sometimes the best stories really do start with the strangest beginnings. Sometimes the greatest loves come from the most unlikely places. And sometimes, just sometimes, being left behind is exactly what you need to find your way home.